Welcome to the People's Candidate Forum. Joining us now is Public Servant Frangell Basora, candidate for Congress in District 15. Thank you for your interest in representing this community. Let's begin. We'll start off with an icebreaker question. Please share a 1 or 2 word intention you hold for today's interview.
To have the people of the Bronx get to know one of their own for a run for office.
Thank you.
First question is, the South Bronx has been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. With public health officials forecasting a potential second wave, what will you do if you are hired to respond to this ongoing crisis?
Of course, I think that the first step, right, once we get to Congress, once we get to office, is to make sure that we bring in any and all federal resources to cater and lift the small businesses and life in our most low-income and vulnerable areas in the country, specifically, particularly in our case, NY15. I think that saving low-income communities and communities of color needs to be the utmost priority. That's the first step. The second step, and the most immediate step, is to close the seal. COVID has only very much highlighted a lot of what our neighborhoods have struggled with for generations, a lot of what we were raised in. And so it's a matter of making sure that we address that unapologetically. And that's housing, that is a federal jobs guarantee, that is making sure that we are providing healthcare, that we are saving our people's lives, saving our people's jobs, and that we're instituting legislation that lifts our people essentially out of poverty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In regards to criminal justice reform and jails, Congressman Jose Serrano has stood with a large contingent of community members who oppose the city's plan to build a new jail in Mott Haven. What is your position on the plan, which would put the new jail on a plot of land already earmarked by the community for an affordable housing development? And what have you done or what will you do to advance your position on this?
Of course, I am vehemently against building jails in our communities. Again, I am from the Bronx. I grew up a few blocks away from where the jail is planned to be constructed in. So this is personal, right? You never see any other of the wealthier neighborhoods in New York City getting these jails. I think that City Council, kudos to them for closing Rikers, but I think that the next step of avoiding jails in our communities needed to be taken. I have protested, I have called for action. Our next steps is very much working with our communities, bringing in federal legislation, bringing in state legislation, and city legislation to see what can be done. I do not stand for new jails. I do think that the Bronx needed and deserved better, and that our people have fought for way too long to receive that end of the deal.
Thank you, Frangell.
Thank you. I have a quick response question. Please complete the following sentence. Today, I want to make the world.
Today, I want to make the world smaller. I want all of us to really have an equal chance in our country.
Thank you.
Thanks. A question about public housing, Frangell. Residents of Nycha have been facing deplorable conditions for decades due to federal underfunding. What will you do to fix public housing with less public funding available than ever because of the current economic crisis?
Of course. I do want to, and thank you for the question, I do want to highlight that less public funding is a myth, and that the federal government has what it takes to save Nycha. I think that we have to save Nycha from privatization. That is the first step. Privatization in any regard shows that it ends up hurting our tenants. And it's a matter on the federal level, very much fighting for a homes guarantee legislation that prioritizes Nycha, but also working with our city governments and our state governments to make sure that our people are being saved from the Nycha crisis, because it is a crisis that very much needs to be prioritized.
Thanks.
Let's talk about affordable housing. Who really is it affordable for? Community members have embraced community land trusts, which would take property off the speculative real estate market to develop deeply affordable housing. What specific actions will you take to ensure affordable housing and home ownership is possible for the people in our community?
Of course. So, you guys, you're speaking to someone whose family has very much dealt with housing insecurity and has very much struggled with what that means. So it's very important. I think any and all affordable housing and any all plans needs to stay for our people. We're seeing too many loopholes that would allow for gentrification, too many loopholes that are actually meant to displacing our people, right? So it just, in any and all deals that are brought forth, it's a matter of making sure that affordable housing is meant and stays for our people. The next step in all federal legislation, right? Because a housing guarantee legislation is very much part of the priority. It needs to become rebuilding our housing conversation and making sure that we are prioritizing lower income people and that we are giving them the tools and the chance to own the homes that they live in and to build that generational wealth as well. So again, as with everything else, it's a matter of giving our people that priority, protecting our people from outside resources and outside influence as well.
Thank you.
In regards to arts and culture, a majority of the creative workforce, meaning artists in all disciplines, are freelancers and or seasonal workers. COVID-19 has resulted in a dramatic loss of income for them. What would you do to help creative workers overcome these challenges?
Of course, I think, so part of our legislation is prioritizing small businesses. I consider freelance workers to be her and his own small businesses. So it's a matter of making sure that we build financial resources that freelancers can apply to and receive the resources that they need, right? Especially, I think, the larger conversation when it comes to NY15 is connecting NY15 economy to the US's economy and that opportunity. And because NY15 is so disconnected, what we're seeing is our people building their own businesses, our people very much choosing their own paths. So it's a matter of making sure that our federal government recognizes that sector of employment. You know, my mother worked in immigrant beauty salons, and in a way that's its own freelance work. So I understand personally that this is how our families are surviving.
Thank you.
You've already touched a couple of times on the importance of small businesses in NY15. And as you know, they've been hurting for a long time because of rent hikes, the influx of big box stores and online sales. Now with COVID and looting, the latest crises, they've fallen even further behind. So what specifically would you do, given what you've said before, to restart small business and to promote entrepreneurship in our area?
Of course, I think the first step is to get somebody in Congress who understands how the economy in the Bronx works. A lot of what we're seeing when it comes to these economic legislation are these really big plans. And from my personal experience in the Bronx, these huge national plans are the first to forget about lower income people and the way that they sustain themselves. So it's a matter of building legislation that focuses primarily on small businesses and NY15, and because this is national, on vulnerable and low income areas and in communities of color. I think that we certainly need resources, departments that people can tap into. I think that we need to make sure that loans get to these small businesses. I think it's a complete disgrace that a lot of the COVID legislation resources did not reach the Bronx, that our small businesses did not receive any of the loans. You know, our people are hurting, and it's a making sure that we focus the attention on NY15's economy, and that's not what we've seen generationally whatsoever. Legislation that targets specifically our communities of color.
Thank you. How specifically would you provide teeth to the community-driven solutions that have been articulated over the years by many of the organizations hosting this forum today and others that you may have recently engaged?
Of course. I'm assuming we're speaking about small businesses, or are we just opening this up to general?
More broadly, yeah.
More broadly, I think. So right now, the biggest concern, right, is our criminal justice, just our criminal justice system, right? I'm a big believer that we need to decrease incarceration by at least 50%. I think that on the state and national, specifically New York State level, we need to reform and repeal 50A to make sure that we are receiving transparency from police forces. I think that we need to reform police unions to make sure that we're protecting our people. When it comes to specifically our goals of lifting our people out of poverty, part of that is a mental health revolution, right, in which we change the way that mental health is addressed in lower income communities. Part of that is a federal jobs guarantee that makes sure that working to sustain a family isn't just a privilege, but a right in the United States of America. And the last but not least part of that is to making sure that housing is a human right, right? That we're fighting for the homes guarantee legislation, and that we're focusing and targeting our legislation for specifically NY15 and lower income communities throughout the country.
Thank you. So I have a quick response question for you. Please answer yes or no. Do you think drug use is a criminal justice concern?
No, I think it is a public health concern.
Thanks. How will you make sure your federal leverage addresses, or how will you make sure that you use your federal leverage to address the South Bronx's vulnerability to the impacts of climate change?
Of course, I think that a lot of what that looks like is making sure that our federal body understands that African and Hispanic bodies are targets to climate change. The way that a lot of the conversation is looking now is just a blank check that's just being provided for the whole country. A lot of it is about class justice. A lot of this is about race justice. So it's making sure that we tailor our legislation to communities of color, as opposed to, and I think that that's a start to changing how we are addressing climate change in our country.
To wrap up our People's Candidate Forum today, how would you articulate a set of planning principles that will guide development that will serve to both preserve and grow the district? And how would you include the community in the adoption of those principles?
Of course. I am a member of the community, right? I think out of all candidates, I am, let's say, I am a politician, but I'd love to think of myself as the least political, right? And I think that that's how things are going to change from the federal government to our communities. So it's a matter of making sure that our representatives never connect with the people, right? That we have town halls, that any and all legislation comes from our people, that we incite that political revolution from our people. And my values will always be to lift our people out of poverty, to bring the justice that we deserve. And what that looks like, among many different things, is housing as a human right in legislation. It's healthcare with an emphasis in mental health. That's incredibly important. You address mental health, you help poverty in all of our communities. And it's making sure that working is a right in the United States.
Thank you, Frangell. And please answer this next one with a yes or no. Before today, had you taken a pledge against taking money from big corporations like real estate developers and other special interests?
Of course, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest in serving as the next congressperson in District 15. The district will make a decision on June 23rd. Please be well and stay safe.
Yes, thank you so much for having us and for having me. Be safe to you guys as well.